Drake Carter had always thought of himself as a man of reason and diplomacy, someone who could solve conflicts with words, not weapons. As the lead negotiator for the United Earth Alliance, he had spent years navigating the complexities of intergalactic politics. Today, however, he found himself standing in the middle of a massive alien hall, surrounded by representatives from species he had only read about in books. The air buzzed with the low hum of tension, an undercurrent of nervous anticipation hanging thick in the room. This was not a diplomatic meeting. This was something far more dangerous. A summit like this could change the course of history, and Drake's mission was to ensure humanity's place among the stars. The various alien leaders, from towering insectoid creatures to shimmering, translucent beings, sat in their respective sections of the hall, each one watching him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Drake stood tall in his Earth Alliance uniform, trying his best to appear confident. He had handled tough situations before, but today was different. As the summit began, the doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward the entrance. In walked Zerathera, a figure so striking that it took Drake a moment to process what he was seeing. She wasn't like the other delegates. She was an alien warlord, known across the galaxy as a fierce conqueror from a long-forgotten race. Her appearance was imposing, almost regal. She stood over 6 feet tall, her body clad in sleek, dark armor that seemed to shimmer as if alive. Her eyes, Drake Carter stood frozen, his mind racing as the alien warlord, Zerathera, locked her gaze onto him. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce through him, and for a moment, he could swear that time itself had come to a halt. The entire room, filled with representatives from various species, fell into an uneasy silence. No one dared to speak or move. The tension was thick, like a storm about to break. Every eye in the hall was now on Drake, and the weight of their collective gaze made him feel like he was standing on trial. The alien delegates exchanged confused glances. It was clear that no one had expected this. Zerathera, a figure of legend known for her ruthlessness, had just demanded a human as her prize. But why? Drake's mind was a whirlwind of questions. Was this some sort of test, a political stunt, or something deeper? He had no idea, but the fear that gripped him was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. As the murmurs of disbelief spread across the hall, Zerathera's guards began to move toward him, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Drake Carter, one of them spoke, his voice low and commanding. The name sounded almost foreign coming from the alien's mouth. "Come with us." Drake didn't have much of a choice. The guard's towering presence made it clear that resistance would be futile. But what stunned him even more was the strange sense of inevitability that lingered in the air. There was no turning back now. As he walked toward Zerathera, the room seemed to shift around him. He felt the eyes of every species in the hall still trained on him, studying him, judging him. When he reached the center, Zerathera spoke again, her voice smooth but with an undeniable edge. "You will be mine," she said, her words like a promise, though it carried an air of finality that left Drake no room for argument. She was not asking. She was stating a fact. Drake's heart pounded in his chest, his mind desperately searching for an explanation. What did she mean? Why a human? Why him? He was just a diplomat, an ordinary man thrust into extraordinary circumstances. He had faced threats before, but this felt different. There was something in Zerathera's eyes that told him this wasn't about some political game. She wanted him for reasons far beyond what anyone could comprehend. Zerathera's gaze softened for a split second, though it was fleeting. Her eyes held a depth that made Drake uneasy. She wasn't just a conqueror. There was a vulnerability hidden beneath her cold exterior. But before he could dwell on it, the moment passed. The guards flanked him, guiding him out of the hall, and the sounds of the murmuring crowd grew distant. As the doors of the chamber closed behind him, Drake was left alone in the presence of the alien warlord. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: His life had just taken a turn he could never have predicted. Whatever Zerathera's reasons were, Drake knew he was about to learn more than he ever wanted to know about the strange, terrifying alien woman who had chosen him as her prize. As Drake was escorted down a narrow, dimly lit corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything about his life had just shifted in an instant. The guards flanking him were silent, their faces emotionless, but their presence was enough to make him feel like a prisoner. The walls of the hallways seemed to close in, pressing against him with every step. He had no idea where they were taking him or what Zerathera's intentions were, but a part of him knew this wasn't just some political maneuver. There was something personal about her demand, something that went beyond the expectations of the summit. Finally, they'd reached a large metallic door. One of the guards punched in a series of codes on a keypad, and the door slid open with a low hiss. Inside was a lavish room, the kind Drake had only seen in the holos of alien luxury. Yet, it was starkly different from the sterile, orderly rooms of the summit he had just left. The room felt alive, brimming with strange, otherworldly energy. The lights above flickered softly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. At the center of the room stood Zerathera, her golden eyes locked onto him as he entered. "Sit," she commanded, her voice unwavering, and Drake obeyed instinctively. Despite his best efforts to remain calm, a knot tightened in his stomach. He had been a diplomat for years, trained to handle all kinds of situations, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. The warlord before him was a mystery, a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Zerathera walked toward him slowly, her footsteps soundless against the floor. Her armor gleamed in the dim light, the dark material contrasting against her pale skin. She was tall, intimidating, but there was something about the way she moved that suggested both power and grace. As she approached, she removed her helmet, revealing a face that was both alien and striking. Her sharp features softened with a strange intensity, her golden eyes studying Drake with a focused, almost calculating gaze. "You must be wondering why," she said, her voice softer now, though no less commanding. "Why a human?" Drake nodded, unable to find the words. He had been asking himself the same question ever since she had made her demand. What could someone like her possibly want with a simple human like him? He was no warrior, no conqueror. He was just a man, caught in the web of intergalactic politics. Zerathera's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Humans are unique," she continued. "You have a spirit unlike any other species in the galaxy. Your resilience, your ability to adapt, to survive, it is what makes you valuable." Her words were not boastful, nor were they flattering. There was a depth to them, a sincerity that caught Drake off guard. Drake's mind spun. He had always known humans had a certain reputation, but he had never thought of himself as anything special. He had just been doing his job, negotiating peace, keeping the balance. But here, in the presence of Zerathera, he realized there was much more to the story than he had understood. "I need a human," Zerathera repeated, her tone unwavering. "Not just as a prize, but as a partner, someone who can understand what my people are facing, someone who can survive the trials that are coming." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, Drake realized that his fate was no longer in his hands. He was part of something far bigger than any political summit or diplomatic mission. He was now tangled in the complex web of Zerathera's world, and there was no turning back. The atmosphere in Zerathera's chamber grew heavier with each passing moment. Drake's mind was still spinning from the revelation that Zerathera wanted him for more than just a political gesture. She was serious. She had been watching him, studying humanity, and now he was caught in the middle of something far larger than anything he could have imagined. As he sat across from her, he could feel her eyes on him, weighing him, considering him like an object of great value. It unsettled him, but at the same time, a part of him was drawn to her. Not just her strength and power, but the underlying vulnerability she kept hidden beneath her stoic exterior. Zerathera's golden eyes softened as she watched him digest her words. There was no anger or impatience in her gaze, only an intense curiosity, like she was waiting for him to make his next move. Drake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The silence stretched, filling the room like thick smoke. Finally, Zarathustra broke the stillness. "You're wondering why a human," she said, her voice low, but somehow filled with both authority and something else, something almost like hesitation. "You think we are superior, don't you? That our advanced technology and battle prowess make us the strongest. But strength is not only in the body. It's in the will to survive, the refusal to give up." Drake's eyes narrowed as he tried to process what she was saying. He was still trying to figure out how he, a simple diplomat, fit into this larger picture. He had faced danger before, but he was never the one to go looking for it. He wasn't a soldier. He was a negotiator, a man who used words instead of weapons. Yet here he was, sitting before one of the most feared and respected warlords in the galaxy. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice shaky but firm. "Why not one of your own warriors? Why a human?" Zarathustra's lips curled into a faint, almost amused smile. "Because humans are adaptable," she said simply. "You think on your feet. You survive against all odds. You find solutions when others see only obstacles. My people, our strength comes from fighting, from conquest, but we have lost something along the way. We have forgotten what it means to truly survive." She paused, as if searching for the right words. Drake couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy for her. There was more to her than the cold, calculating warlord persona she projected. She was searching for something that could save her people, and maybe even herself. "I need you to prove that humans can do what my people cannot," she continued. "To survive the trials. To show me that your species can endure where others have failed." Drake wasn't sure what she meant by trials, but the weight of her request was clear. This wasn't just about him being her prize. It was about something deeper, something that tied his survival to the future of her people. He could feel the pressure mounting, the realization that his actions could have consequences beyond his own life. As the moments passed in silence, Drake made a decision. He wasn't just going to sit back and let Zarathustra control his fate. He had a role to play, one that was just as important to him as it was to her. He would prove her right or wrong, but he would do it on his own terms. "All right," Drake said, his voice steady now. "I'll face your trials. But if I'm going to do this, I need to understand what you really want. This isn't just about your people, is it?" Zarathustra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Drake saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, a hint of hope. The next day, Drake found himself standing in the heart of the arena, staring out at the vast expanse before him. The place felt like a battlefield from an ancient world, stone walls towering high above, strange alien creatures lurking in the shadows, and the echoes of distant sounds that made his skin crawl. This wasn't just any trial. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something that would either prove the strength of the human spirit or break him entirely. Beside him, Zarathustra stood tall, her presence imposing as ever. Her eyes glinted with a mixture of anticipation and something deeper, something Drake couldn't quite place. She didn't speak at first, only gestured for him to follow her. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he knew there was no turning back. He had committed himself to this trial, and he wasn't about to back down now. "This is not just a test of strength," Zarathustra said finally, her voice smooth and commanding, yet there was something almost gentle in her tone. "It is a test of your will, your resilience, your ability to adapt when all seems lost." She glanced at him, her golden eyes unwavering. "Your kind is known for thinking quickly. Let's see if you can prove it." Drake swallowed hard, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't a fighter. He had never been trained to battle monsters or navigate deadly traps. But he had always been a quick thinker, a problem solver. He hoped that was enough to get him through this. The trial began as a loud, rumbling noise echoed through the arena, and the ground beneath them trembled. Out of the darkness emerged massive mechanical beasts, their eyes glowing red with menace. They weren't just machines. They were predators, designed to challenge the very limits of human endurance. Each of them was nearly twice Drake's size, and their movements were quick and precise. For a moment, Drake froze, his breath catching in his throat. He had never seen anything like them before. Zarathustra's voice cut through his panic. "You must think. Use your mind, not your strength. That's your greatest weapon." The first beast lunged toward him, its massive claws outstretched. Drake's heart raced, but his instincts kicked in. He darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's deadly swipe. His mind raced as he looked for an escape route, any way to outwit the machine. The beast turned to face him again, its eyes narrowing as if it were studying him, anticipating his next move. Drake's pulse thundered in his ears, but he didn't panic. He focused on his training, recalling the countless situations where he had to negotiate under pressure, find solutions when the stakes were high. He spotted a weakness in the creature's movement, a slight delay in its right leg as it pivoted. Without thinking twice, he used his agility to dodge and then strike, aiming for the beast's vulnerable point just below its massive shoulder. The creature faltered, giving him a moment's respite. Drake didn't hesitate. He took the opportunity to dart forward, using the environment to his advantage, swinging from the edge of a rock ledge to outmaneuver the machine. Zarathustra's eyes flickered with something resembling approval. She had watched him closely, and for the first time, Drake could see the respect forming in her gaze. The fight wasn't over yet, but with each move, Drake could feel the weight of her challenge lifting. He wasn't just surviving this trial. He was proving something to her. As he faced the next creature, the adrenaline surging through his veins, Drake realized something important. Zarathustra had been right all along. It wasn't just about strength. It was about the will to survive, the power of human ingenuity and resilience. And now, as he prepared for the next test, he was ready to show her exactly what humanity was capable of. As the final mechanical beast crumpled to the ground, sparks flying from its broken joints, Drake stood panting, his body covered in a thin sheen of sweat. He had barely survived the first trial, and yet he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had done it. Against all odds, his human adaptability had outsmarted the machines designed to test his strength. But as he wiped the sweat from his brow and looked around the arena, a new feeling started to settle in his chest. This wasn't over. Zarathustra's trials were just beginning. Zarathustra stood in the shadows, her golden eyes glowing with approval, but her expression was unreadable. She had seen him fight, seen him think on his feet, and yet there was something about the way she watched him that made Drake feel like a puzzle she was trying to solve. The warlord had been silent throughout the trial, but as he caught his breath, she stepped forward, her footsteps echoing through the arena. "You passed the first trial," Zarathustra said, her voice steady. "But there is more to come." Drake didn't reply. He knew she wasn't offering praise for the sake of it. Her words were never empty. She had a reason for everything, and he was certain she was pushing him toward something greater, something more than just surviving these tests. "There is more at stake than you realize," Zarathustra continued, her eyes narrowing. "My people are facing extinction. We have lost our ability to survive in the face of adversity. But you," she paused, a flicker of emotion crossing her face, "you have shown me that survival is not just about brute force. It is about something deeper." Drake looked at her, feeling an unexpected shift in his heart. He had known Zarathustra as a warrior, a conqueror, someone who demanded strength and obedience from those around her. But there was something in her tone now, something vulnerable, that made him see her in a new light. It was as if she was reaching out, but unsure whether she could trust him. "You think too highly of humans," Drake said cautiously. "I'm just doing what I can to survive." Zarathustra's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, she looked less like a warlord and more like a woman struggling with a heavy burden. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice filled with a rare sadness. "My people, we've been at war for so long. We've lost our way, and I've been searching for something. Someone who can remind us what it means to live, to survive not just for the sake of survival, but for something more." Drake's heart tightened as he saw the depth of her pain. He had heard whispers of her people's troubles, of their ongoing struggles to find peace and stability. But hearing it from her, seeing the weight of it in her eyes, made everything feel more real, more urgent. For the first time, Drake understood. This wasn't just about him passing her trials. It was about something much bigger. Zerathera wasn't just testing his strength or his ingenuity. She was testing his humanity. She needed him to prove that there was still hope, that there was still a way for her people to survive, to rebuild, and to find meaning in their fight. "I'll do whatever it takes," Drake said, his voice firm. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for Zerathera, for her people, and for a future that none of them had ever imagined. Zerathera's golden eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, a genuine smile flickered on her lips. It was small, but it was there. An acknowledgement, a recognition that they were no longer enemies, but something else entirely. Something that neither of them had expected. The trials had only just begun, but Drake could already feel the weight of them bearing down on him. Zerathera had led him into the heart of her homeland, a place he had never imagined he would set foot. The air here was thick with the tension of an ancient conflict, a constant reminder that her people were not only fighting for survival, but also for something deeper, something Drake had yet to fully understand. Today's trial was unlike any he had faced before. As they entered a vast, open arena, Drake's eyes were immediately drawn to the massive structure in the center. It was a towering spire of metal, pulsating with energy, and surrounded by a labyrinth of narrow, winding pathways. The challenge was clear. The spire held the key to unlocking the next phase of Zerathera's trials, but only the most clever, the most resilient, could navigate the maze and reach the pinnacle. Zerathera's voice rang out, cutting through the quiet air. "This is a test of endurance, intellect, and heart. You will not be alone in this trial. Others, from my people, will try to stop you, but you must reach the top, no matter what it takes." Drake didn't hesitate. He had made it this far by trusting his instincts and his ability to think on his feet. As he stepped into the maze, he could feel the eyes of Zerathera's people watching him. Every turn, every shadow seemed to hide something more dangerous than the last. The walls themselves seemed to close in on him, shifting and changing, as if the maze had a mind of its own. For the first time since he had arrived in Zerathera's world, Drake felt the true weight of her challenge. This was no mere physical trial. It was a test of everything he had ever known about survival. The walls of the maze seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the air grew thicker with every step he took. It wasn't just the maze he had to navigate. It was the strange, almost haunting sensation that someone, or something, was always just a step behind him. Drake pushed forward, focusing on each step, trying to block out the creeping sense of dread. The maze was designed to confuse, to disorient, but he wasn't about to let it defeat him. He had come too far, survived too many obstacles to let this trial break him. He had to prove to Zerathera that humans were more than just survivors. They were problem solvers, creators, thinkers. He had to show her that their greatest strength wasn't in brute force, but in their ability to adapt and think their way out of the impossible. As he navigated the twisting paths, Drake suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but no one was there. The eerie silence that followed made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was watching him, waiting for him to slip up. His heart raced as he moved faster, but the maze seemed to mock him, shifting and changing at every turn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Drake reached the top of the spire. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Zerathera's voice echoed through the air, her tone filled with both admiration and something else, something that made Drake's heart skip a beat. "You have done well," she said, "but this was only the beginning. There is much more to come. If you truly wish to help my people, you will have to face far greater challenges than this." As Drake stood there, breathing heavily, looking down at the maze he had conquered, he realized something important. This trial wasn't just about proving himself to Zarathustra. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of far more than he ever thought possible. He had made it through, and in doing so, he had shown Zarathustra, and perhaps even himself, that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to endure, to fight for what mattered, no matter the odds. And that was only the beginning. The days that followed were filled with even greater challenges, each one testing Drake's mind, body, and spirit in ways he had never imagined. He had faced trials that pushed him to the brink of exhaustion, and with each one, he had felt the weight of Zarathustra's expectations grow heavier. Yet, something in her demeanor had changed. Where once there had been a coldness in her gaze, now there was a flicker of something warmer, almost like a growing respect. Or perhaps something deeper, something neither of them had yet dared to name. Today's trial, however, was unlike any other. Zarathustra had taken him to the outskirts of her city, where the ruins of an ancient battlefield lay scattered across the land. Broken weapons, shattered armor, and the remnants of long-forgotten warriors were buried beneath the earth, a testament to her people's lost glory. The landscape was desolate, filled with an eerie silence that seemed to reflect the state of her civilization, once mighty, now fractured. "This is where it all began," Zarathustra said softly, her voice carrying a weight that made Drake pause. He had never seen her like this before. Her usual commanding tone was replaced with something more contemplative. "This is where my people fought for their survival, and lost." Drake looked around at the destruction, the echoes of battles long past hanging in the air. It was hard to imagine that the fierce warrior before him had once been part of such a grand empire. He felt a pang of sympathy for her, though he wasn't sure if she would welcome it. But she didn't seem to notice, her eyes focused on the horizon, where the remains of her people's past were scattered like broken dreams. "You will face the ultimate test here," Zarathustra continued, her eyes meeting his now, her expression intense. "You've proven that you can adapt, that you can survive the trials I've set before you. But this," she gestured to the ruins, "this will test your heart. It will test your ability to lead, to inspire, and to rebuild what has been lost." Drake's stomach tightened at her words. What did she mean? Was this some kind of leadership trial? He was no leader, he was a negotiator, someone who solved problems with words, not strength. But Zarathustra's eyes held a challenge that he couldn't ignore. "Come with me," she ordered, leading him through the ruins. As they walked, she spoke of the great battles her people had fought, the alliances they had forged, and the terrible cost of their wars. "We were once unstoppable," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "But now, we are scattered, fractured. There is no unity, no purpose. And without it, we will fade into nothingness." Drake listened carefully, trying to understand the weight of her words. This wasn't just about surviving or proving his worth. It was about something much larger. Zarathustra wasn't asking him to fight her people's battles. She was asking him to help them find their purpose again, to lead them toward a future where they could rebuild, not through force, but through unity. As they reached the center of the battlefield, Zarathustra stopped. "This is where it ends. You must decide how to move forward. The next step is yours to take. Will you help me rebuild, or will you turn away?" For the first time, Drake felt the true gravity of his situation. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for something much more important, the future of an entire civilization. He looked at Zarathustra, her eyes searching his for the answer. "I will help you," Drake said firmly, his voice steady. "Together, we can rebuild. Together, we can show your people what true strength really is." Zarathustra's golden eyes softened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fall away. The battle was far from over, but Drake knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. He was part of something much larger now, a future that he and Zerathera would build together. The sun was setting as Drake stood alongside Zerathera at the edge of the battlefield, the glowing embers of the ruined landscape casting long shadows across the earth. The weight of the decision he had just made still hung in the air, but a sense of resolve began to settle over him. He had chosen to stay, to help Zerathera and her people rebuild. It was no longer just about surviving her trials or proving himself. It was about creating something that would last beyond this moment, something that could heal the wounds of a civilization on the brink of collapse. Zerathera didn't speak at first, her gaze distant, as though she was lost in thought. Drake watched her, sensing the conflict within her. She had always been a warrior, a leader forged by battles and conquest, but now she stood before him not as a commander, but as someone who had seen the fragile nature of her people's future. For the first time, Drake saw her not just as a conqueror, but as someone who had lost so much and was now asking for help, not as a show of weakness, but as a desperate plea for a second chance. "You've made the right choice," Zerathera said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met his, and there was an intensity in them that he hadn't seen before. "But this will not be easy. The path ahead will be long, and there will be those who resist." Drake nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Rebuilding a fractured civilization wouldn't be something that could happen overnight. It would take time, trust, and unity, things her people had lost along the way. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this challenge was just another form of the trials he had already faced. He wasn't alone anymore. Zerathera was right beside him, and together they could forge something new. "What will we do first?" Drake asked, his voice steady now. There was no hesitation in his words. He was ready to begin. He knew that the future of Zerathera's people rested in their hands. Zerathera's expression softened slightly, and for a brief moment, she seemed less like the fierce warrior he had first encountered and more like the leader who carried the hopes of her people. "First," she said, her voice strong again, "we must unite the factions. We must show them that we can stand together, that we can overcome our differences for the good of all. It will be a long process, but it is the only way forward." Drake felt a surge of determination. This was more than just about diplomacy or survival. It was about something deeper, something that could change the course of their lives and the lives of countless others. He had seen Zerathera's strength, but now he saw something even more powerful, her willingness to change, to evolve, and to trust in something beyond battle. "Then we'll start there," Drake said, his eyes meeting hers with a confidence that surprised even him. "We'll bring them together. We'll show them that there's more to us than just our past, that humanity and your people can build something better." Zerathera nodded, a small but genuine smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was a rare sight, one that made Drake realize just how far they had come since that first moment when she had demanded a human as her prize. They had gone from adversaries to allies, and now, as partners, they would face the future together. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, Drake felt a sense of purpose. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to thrive and to build a future worth believing in.